morning, everybody. For those of you who are our guests today, my name is Mark Pierce. I am the pastor here at Church Requel, and it's just a pleasure to have you here with us. For the rest of us, what a great day yesterday. Woo! It was so awesome. I know that we've already talked a little bit about it. I don't want to delay, but I really do want to thank you so very, very much for all of your sacrifice, for your serving, for the way that you just poured out your hearts. And and for those special folks over there on that side who designed the torture chamber for the pastor. If my face appears to be a little pink this morning, I went to bed last night, and right before I went to bed, I looked in the mirror and said, "Oh my gosh, I'm getting a black eye." It kind of went down, the swelling this morning. But it's the first time I've ever experienced frostbite, the experience of frostbite in the middle of October. I came home last night, and I was just sitting there feeling my face stinging. This is what frostbite feels like. So the next time I actually get frostbite, I'll say, you know, this is what it feels like when hundreds of kids throw sponges at your face. But everybody just did their job and did it so beautifully. And I've already heard many of you talking about next year. And stop and think about it. If we could pull this off through God's help in a month, just imagine if we had a whole year to prepare. So we really do have a heart for this community, for this neighborhood. I think this is why the Lord put us here. He provided us to be here, and so we want to be responsible in how we handle his gift to us. Oh my. Well, today we want to continue our relationship series from Ephesians, so I welcome you to get out your Bibles. We're a Bible-believing, Bible-toting, Bible-preaching church. So bring your Bibles in with you when you come. If you don't have a Bible, we have a Bible in the pew rack in front of you. Or if you have one of those smartphones or tablets, there's a Bible app that you can download. And we put all of the Bible verses and actually the sermon outline and everything right inside the Bible app. If you just click on that and click on live, you'll find all the notes for today's sermon. So we want to talk about relationships. We've been talking about relationships, and today I just want to remind you of the core premise of what we've been talking about, and that is this, that my relationship with God impacts every other relationship that I have in my life. Okay? We start with our relationship with God. If I want to get my other relationships in my life right, my relationship with my spouse, my relationship with my children, my relationship at work or at school, relationship with my neighbor, the starting point is my relationship with God. And if I have that relationship correct, then the other relationships will come a little bit more easily. Now, we talk a lot around here about being Christ followers. If you're new here, you'll hear we some people call them Christians, but Christian, everybody thinks of Christian in a kind of a different way. So we just kind of use the word Christ follower. What does that mean? It means that I want to follow Christ. I want to be obedient to Christ. But sometimes we get so used to hearing that we stop and forget what it means. I mean, Christ follower means that where he goes, that's where I'm going to follow. So if Christ goes into a different direction than the direction that I'm heading, I don't go my direction, I go Christ's direction. If Christ goes a different direction than what my friends or family are going, I decide that I'm going to go Christ's direction. If Christ goes a different direction than what my plans are, I say, I'm going to ditch my plans and I'm going to follow Christ. If I have something that's going to bring me some short-term pleasure, but it's not what Christ would have for me, if he's going in a different direction than I'm going, it means I want to follow him at the sacrifice of my short-term pleasures. A lot of times we call this both feet in. Christianity, being a Christ follower, is a both feet in kind of religion, kind of faith. You know what I mean by that, right? Anybody ever go swimming in the summertime, and you go out and you go get into the pool or into the lake, and maybe it's really, really warm outside, but the water is cold. Now, there's two ways that you can do this, right? Some of you are waders. Right? And you just kind of go in, and you go in, and you go in, a little bit at a time, and you literally want to experience the pain of that cold water as long as you possibly can. And then there are those who are the both feet in kind of people. They just dive in, and it's a shock, but it's over all at once, right? Christianity is a both feet in kind of faith. It's not a waiting kind of faith. It's not a kind of faith where you're kind of half in and half out. It's the kind of faith where you're all the way in. The Bible actually has a word for this, and this is the first fill in the blank that you have today. If you want to try to live to please God on the one hand, but at the same time you're trying to live to please yourself, the Bible calls that being double-minded. Double-minded. And many of us try to live our Christian lives this way. Living for God sometimes, living for me at other times, living for God sometimes, living our Christian lives the way we think He'd want us to live, trying to please God, but sometimes trying to please other people too. Boy, what a horrible place to be. To try to please everybody all at one time. Being committed to Christ, that's the only way to be a Christ follower. That's the only way to be a Christian. In fact, it was so important that when God was writing up His 10 commandments, He made this His very first commandment. It's the very first one of the big 10. What does it say in Exodus chapter 20, verse 3? You shall have no other gods in front of me. And sometimes we think of gods as being a totem pole kind of thing, or some other kind of religion, or some other kind of named God. But, another God can be anything that we would do that would drive us into a different direction than what Christ would want in our life. If we pursue something else other than what Christ wants for us, if we say, I want this thing, or I want this person, or I want this relationship, or I want to experience this experience, instead of following Christ, we basically have made that person or that thing or that experience a God over Christ. So I want us today to be thinking about what it means to be both feet in, to not be double-minded. There's a story told by a Haitian pastor who came back to the States, and he was sharing this story at a missionary conference one year. And he told this story. It's always been with me about this experience that he had. A Haitian man who was in his congregation in Haiti, who had a house, and he wanted to sell his house. Now, the house was worth, in his mind, $2,000. But there was another man who wanted to buy that house, but he was very poor. He didn't have the $2,000. He only had half of that. He had $1,000. And so the second poor Haitian man offered $1,000 to the first Haitian man who wanted to sell his house. And the first Haitian man said, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll sell you the whole house except for this one nail. And he pounded a nail in the front door of this house. He said, now this whole house is yours except for this nail. This nail belongs to me. And whenever I want you to sell the house back to me, you will agree to sell the house back to me because you didn't give me the full $2,000. You only gave me half of it. So you can have the whole house, but this nail is mine. So some years went by, and there came a time when the first Haitian man wanted to buy his house back. And the second Haitian man who had bought the home said that he didn't want to sell the house and refused to do it. At which point, and forgive me for those of you who are dog lovers, but the first Haitian man took the carcass of a dead dog and hung it up on the nail. I guess they do things differently in Haiti. But legally, The man who owned the home couldn't do a thing about it because the other Haitian man owned the nail. And in essence, it drove the family out of the house because they couldn't live with the stench of the carcass. Now, why do I tell you that horrible story? Because some of you are trying to live your Christian life in such a way where you're leaving this little bit of you for you, and you're not all feet in for Christ. You have this little nail that's part of your heart that you basically say, Christ, you can have all of me, but this one little part I reserve for myself. And what I'm here to tell you this morning is that if you hold back anything from Christ, that is the way in for your spiritual enemy. And some of you are living this kind of double-minded life where you're trying to live for Christ, but at the same time, you've got this thing going on in your life that you know that Christ wouldn't want for you. And sometimes your life stinks because you're not all in. So today, just for the next few minutes, what I want to do is give you some heart checks. You want to be all in. And so I'm just going to run through a little bit of a survey for you where the Bible talks about being double-minded. And I just want you to be thinking back to yourself. Am I all in or not in this area of my life? And if I mention something to you today that kind of hits you what feels like between the eyes, it's not Mark talking. That's the Holy Spirit saying, hey, here is the little bit of nail that you're leaving in your heart. Maybe this is something you need to work on. And if you do that, if you say, Lord, I don't want any nails that somebody else owns. I want the whole thing to be to you. I want you today to commit that to the Lord. That when you leave here today, you're not leaving anything for anybody else. That you're saying, Lord, I'm all in. I'm not going to be double-minded. I'm both feet in for you. So let's just take a look at a couple of things where the Bible talks about this. The first heart check that I'd like you to check your own heart about is am I both feet in or am I double-minded when it comes to the way I pray? Am I both feet in or am I double-minded when it comes to the way I pray? Here's a question really in a different way. Do you pray like you really believe it will come true? Do you pray like you really believe there's somebody on the other end who's listening to you? Do you pray like you know the Lord that you are praying to? For some of you, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cause you grief here, but when someone says, hey, will you pray out loud? Or you say, no, I'm just too embarrassed to be able to pray out loud. Or can you pray with confidence? Because you're in this prayer life with Christ all the time, so it's just the most natural thing for you to be able to pray. Would anybody else know or suspect that you're a Christ follower by the way you pray? Here's how the Apostle James put it. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. There's that word, double-minded. You might circle that. If you are praying on the one hand and saying, Lord, if this be your will, I don't see how it could possibly be happening, but if you want it, then I'm there with you. I have to tell you, as your pastor, and if some of you struggle with this, I want you to know that I struggle with this too. And this last weekend is a really good example of that. I mean, I have been praying for the Fall Festival all along for this last month. But I wasn't praying, believing like we'd have 300 people show up yesterday, right? I've been praying, for our Saturday night meals when we serve meals. I got a text from Sherry this morning who told me that we had over 200 people, 225 people who got meals, the very first meal, not 225 meals where people came back for seconds and thirds. We had a record number of people who showed up last night to get a meal. Here, 225 first meals. Amazing. And yet, when I hear these good reports, at the end of the day, I ask myself, this is my heart check. Maybe you're here with me, I don't know. But my heart check is, man, was I praying like this would really happen? Am I praying like I really thought there'd be 300 people show up for the fall festival or 225 people show up for the Saturday night meal? I'm telling you that God wants to do some amazing things through you and through our church. And we can't look around and just see what we can see in terms of the resources that we have or the number of people that we have. We have to think in terms of what the Lord wants to accomplish, what he wants to do, because he's a much bigger God than we are. You know, even in our private prayer life, maybe you can identify with this. Do you pray like you believe it? Do you pray like God really loves you, that he really wants the best for you? How about when the unexpected comes up? When things don't go the way that you thought that they would? How do you pray then? Is prayer the first response that you have? Is it like the most natural thing that you would do? You know, I actually heard about a committee at a church, not this church, but a committee at another church that, you know, they were going through all kinds of ideas of how to solve a particular problem. And at the end of this, somebody said, well, you know, maybe we should pray about it. And another committee member said, wow, has it really come to this? Well, that's kind of our attitude sometimes, right? Like prayer would be kind of the last thing that we do, kind of the last-ditch effort when we've exhausted everything else that we have. And now, well, I guess we're going to have to pray about it. When the Lord says, now that's the first thing I want. I want you to come to me first. So, heart check. Am I both feet in or am I double-minded when it comes to the way I pray? Here's another one, another heart check. See if this applies to anybody here. Am I both feet in or am I double-minded when it comes to the way I position myself? What do you mean by position? Do I live my life so carefully neutral that no one would really ever know from my words or my actions that I'm a Christ follower? I'm talking about outside of the four walls of our church here. You know, when you're out there and you're in the middle of your work life or your school life and you're with somebody, or maybe you're with somebody for the first time and you don't really know what they're thinking about this whole thing of Christianity, do you test the waters to see what other people think? Sorry about those sounds. Do you test the waters first to see what other people think? See what they're saying first before you respond? You have to get involved to have an impact. You know, we're in the middle of football season, and some of you, to your dread, know that I'm a football fan. I love to watch football, so I can't help but have a football analogy every now and then. But have you noticed that nobody is ever particularly impressed by the win-loss record of the referee? Right? Who talks about that? What I'm saying to you is, don't be neutral. Don't try to just be fair-minded when it comes to issues and when it comes to things where you believe with all of your heart that God would have a really strong opinion about this. I fear that way too often we get angry about the things that we're mad about, that tick us off, and we don't ever get emotional or angry or have a response about the things that really might tick God off. And yet we're Christ followers. We should be following him. And I'm not saying that everybody here should be, emotionally involved in every single issue that comes up. God creates us all differently. It's all uniquely. But are you open to saying, I'm going to position myself on this thing so that there's no doubt about where I stand? Are you both feet in, or are you double-minded with the way you pray, with the way you position? And here's another one. See if this applies to anybody. Are you both feet in, or are you double-minded when it comes to my money? Do I give the first fruits of my income to the Lord? Does he get the very first part? Do I have an attitude and a trust and a faith that everything I have, whether it be my job, my income, everything I have financially comes first from the Lord? And that if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have any of this. And so I want to give back the first fruits to him so that my testimony for my wealth, whatever that might be, would be to him and not to me. Here's another way of putting this. And I don't mean to make anybody squirm, but just ask yourself this question. Am I a tither or am I a tipper? Right? Here's how Jesus put it. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Now, I get it that when we talk about this, that there's probably no area of our life that is more difficult for us to be both feet in than when it comes to our money. And there's a good reason for that, because oftentimes our money is what we are trusting in. Our finances, our financial plans, our plans for retirement, our plans for, taking care of our family. I mean, we have very good reasons for that. There's nobody in this audience who knows that better than me, because I spent 25 years of my life counseling people on how to handle their finances well. That was my career before I became a pastor. And it often broke my heart to see that the people who were the wealthiest people that I knew, the wealthiest clients that I had, were oftentimes, and by the way, who also named Christ as their Savior, who were Christ followers. Every time the market would dip, every time something would have a reversal in their financial fortunes, they'd be so worried about it. And it became clear that they were trusting in their money more than what they were trusting in the Lord, who provided that money to them. So when it comes to your money, how you doing? Are you saying, hey, I'm both feet in. Here's my checkbook. Open it up. Take a look. Here I am, It's a hard thing, but it's one of those things that I think that I have seen so many people financially who, once they came to that place where they said, I'm just not going to mess around with this anymore. I get my paycheck, I get my retirement plan, I get my whatever it might be, I just move the decimal point over. That's a tenth. There it is. Lord, it's yours. And now I'm going to count on you to live on the rest, because you're providing it for me. Am I both feet in, or am I double-minded? Not only in terms of my money, but how about my calendar? How about my calendar? Am I both feet in, or am I double-minded when it comes to my time, my calendar? Just like I'm asking you to check your checkbook to see if you're both feet in, check your calendar, your appointments, your investment of your time. That's the most precious thing we have, right? Whatever time remaining we have, that's all we have. But we give it to the Lord, our most precious thing. Again, the Apostle John says it this way in 1 John 2:15, don't love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. So what do I love the most? Where is my both feet in when it comes to my time? Or this, check your heart here. How I pray, how I position my money, my calendar, or here, who I hang out with. And this brings us back to our Ephesians passage, for those of you who wondered if we were ever going to get there. Here we come to that relationship portion of today's sermon. Do I hang out with people who are fully devoted followers of Christ? Do I make it a point to hang out with people who pray? Do I make it a point to hang out with people who measure their positions by God's position, not by what they think? Do I hang out with people who are fully trusting with their finances, who are fully invested with their time? I think we all got a sense of that yesterday, didn't we? For those of us who were here, for those of us who were serving. Many of us showed up at 10. I think everybody was here by 1 o'clock. And as wonderful as it was to see the hundreds of our neighbors who came yesterday, what I walked away with was this sense of single-minded purpose that we all had when we were serving together and we were hanging out together. And it was encouraging to me, and I know it was encouraging to you. Do you hang out with people like that? Psalm 119, I don't know if you know this or not, but Psalm 119 is the longest chapter in the Bible. You want to have some fun sometime, try to read through Psalm 119. I don't know if you know the history of Psalm 119 or not, but tradition has it that David used Psalm 119 to teach his son Solomon the Hebrew alphabet. And so he created this psalm for that purpose, because every section of Psalm 119 starts with the next Hebrew letter. And it works its way through that way. When we come to Psalm 119, 113, and 115, we read this, talking about double-mindedness and who the people I hang out with. It says this: I hate double-minded people. There's that word, double-minded. I hate double-minded people, but I love your law, God's law. And then he says this: away from me, you evildoers, talking about double-minded people, away from me, you evildoers, that I may keep the commands of my God. You see, who I hang out with matters. The people who I allow to influence me is really important. I need to choose my friends wisely. I need to choose my spouse wisely. I need to choose those people who I partner with in business wisely, because the people that I'm spending my time with really matters. Now, you may be tempted to think that this isn't a big deal, but let's take a look and see what Ephesians 5, 7, and 8 say, the first verses that we have for these next couple of minutes. Therefore, do not be partners with them. Again, talking about people who are not following Christ. Do not be partners with them, for once you were in darkness, but now you are the light in the Lord. Live as children of light. Again, if you don't think this is a big deal, what does this say here? We become like the people that we hang out with. You talk to any teenager who ever gets in trouble, you'll find out that most of the time it's because of the group that they were hanging out with, right? Mom and dads, you know this. The principle works like this, in both directions, for good as well as for bad. Who am I consciously choosing to be with? People who are faithful to the Lord or not? Because it matters to me. Now, let's wrap this up with 3 ways that we can make sure that we're both feet in with God. If any of these 5, you say, wow, you know, this one here kind of applies to me, or that one there kind of applies to me. How do I respond? I don't want to leave you with a kind of a negative heart check. You know, when you go into the doctor to get some kind of assessment, they tell you all the good things, hopefully, but they also will tell you if you have a particular issue or a particular problem, right? What is the response? Well, what can I do about it? What's the medication I have to take? What's the diet that I have to go on to? What is the new athletic regimen that I have to do for exercise? Okay, right? So let's look at this in terms of what we can do about this, not just, leave here down about the fact that we might be failing in some way or another. We all are failing. Let's get over that, right? If we could be honest about those 5 things I just talked about, all of us, including me, all of us would not be living up 100% the way we should be in one of those 5 ways. So what can we do about it? Here's 3 things. First of all, check my output. Check my output. I want you to imagine just for a moment that you're in a dark room and you can't see your way out. Let's assume that the power has gone out. It's when you got a big storm going on, it's dark outside. Or maybe you're down in the basement because a tornado's coming, whatever, and there's no power and it's dark. But you have a flashlight. Not on yet, but you have a flashlight. Now the question is, can you turn that flashlight on? Does it work? How are the batteries in that flashlight? I mean, you would check on that, right? If you were in a dark place and you were going to rely on that flashlight, you'd want to know that that flashlight is working properly. And the same thing is true with the light or darkness of what you see and what you do in life. Ephesians 5:9 puts it this way: for the fruit of the light, that's the output of the light, the fruit of the light, the output of the light consists in all goodness, righteousness, and truth. So when you see the things that's going out of your life, is it filled with goodness, righteousness, and truth? Or are there some areas that's going out of your life that really couldn't be described as goodness, righteousness, and truth? Jesus' teaching on this was pretty clear. In essence, what he said was garbage in, garbage out. He didn't put it in those terms. That's my translation. But if there's good stuff going on into the inside, if you're feeding your mind and feeding yourself with good things, then the things that come out of your life, your output, is going to be positive as well. Luke 6:45, this is Jesus teaching. He says this, a good person produces good things. Okay, that's the output. A good person produces good things from the treasury, get this, the treasury of a good heart. Now, he's not talking about that physical pump that you have. He's talking about your life. He's talking about the inside of who you are. A good person produces good things from the treasury of a good heart, the inside of them. And an evil person produces evil things from the treasury of an evil heart. So clearly the question is, what's in the treasury of your heart? Are you storing up good things or are you storing up bad things? You know, I said the one way to check to see if you're both feet in or both feet out here was to check my output. Let me amend that for just a moment. Check my output, but write this down too, change my input. Check my output, but change my input. Sometimes, and we get this wrong, we think that if there's something that I'm doing wrong or that I'm struggling with, if we have a particular sin in our life that just really, when we think about it in the light of day, we feel pretty badly about it, and we wish we could change that output. Here is the truth. You can't change the output. You can't do it, or you would have done it a long time ago. But what you can do is you can change the input. If you're feeding your mind with the good things, with prayer, with the Bible, with sermons, with time with the Lord, with other people, Christian friends that you trust, good things are going to be coming out. But if in the quietness of your alone moments, you're feeding yourself with the really lousy things of life, if you're keeping that little nail in your life, as we were talking about, don't be surprised that the output isn't always going to be what you want. Again, the time to be checking the batteries on your flashlight is not when the storm comes. It's in the light of day when everything is going good. You want to make sure those batteries are good. Same thing is true now. Are you filling your mind and your heart with God's word, with righteous people's influences, so that the outcome, the outflow of your life are good? So one thing to do, check the output, change the input. Here's the second thing. Ask God. Ask God. Today's sermon, to be honest with you, is not rocket science. Some of you are sitting back and saying, boy, I could have wrote this sermon this morning. Yeah, absolutely you could. This is not hard stuff. This is not rocket science. If you want to know what pleases God, just ask him. Ephesians 5:10, our next verse. Find out what pleases the Lord. Now, I know some of you really struggle with this because you come and you talk to me about your prayer life, and some of you will tell me, I just don't hear from God. I pray, but it seems like the communication is kind of a one-way direction. It's from me to him, and I don't really hear back from him. Well, let me tell you a couple of things about that. You really don't need to hear the audible voice of God to know most of what it is that he expects from you, to know what would please him, because he has given us his word. These are the things that over a period of 1,400 years, he told 40 different human authors in different times and different places about what pleases him. And if we really want to know what pleases him, if we really want to hear from him, we read his word. We know we love him by obeying his commandments that he has given us. And then the other thing, just as God has given us each a unique shape, we talk about our unique shape sometimes here at Church Requel, that God has created each one of us with a different spiritual giftedness, a different heart, a different ability, a different personality, different past experiences. God has shaped each one of us differently to accomplish things for him and his kingdom here on earth. So what may seem incredibly important to one person may not seem as important to someone else. And God knows that. And he will work through you for those particular areas of what would please him. Galatians 1:10 says this, do you think I am trying to make people accept me? This is Paul talking. Do you think I'm trying to make people accept me? No, God is the one I'm trying to please. Am I trying to please people? If I still wanted to please people, I would certainly not be a servant of Christ. So what am I worried about? Pleasing people or pleasing Christ? So check my output, change my input. Ask God, listen to what he has to say, read his word, check my shape at how God has created me and think, man, is there something in particular that he wants to use my giftedness for? Do you know that when I first went to school in kindergarten, that the teacher wrote back to my mom and dad on my grade card, I still have it to this day, it's down in the basement, Mark likes to talk a lot. Nothing has changed. So God has given me the gift of gab a little bit, okay? And he uses that in how I teach and how I preach. You may not have that particular shape, but God has shaped you for whatever it is that he wants you to do. Ask him, how have you shaped me? How do you want to use me? And then last but not least, get on the right side. Get on the right side. Do something about it. Don't just think about what's the right side. What are you talking about? Just do it. Your worship of Jesus will cause you, if you really do worship him in those private moments, you will find that there are things in this world that you really care about. And you want to do something about it. You just can't help sometimes but become passionate. As we were talking before, sometimes you can't help but become angry about the things that might anger the Lord. What does Ephesians tell us? Ephesians 5:11 and 13 have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. Everything exposed by the light becomes visible, and everything that is illuminated becomes light. Now, this is where our relationships with other people, as we've been talking about, really comes into play. Because I ask myself, who am I trying to please the most? Is it the Lord or is it the people around me? Am I worried about what people are going to think? Exposing the darkness, by the way, is not a pleasant thing sometimes. There are people who are in darkness who don't want it exposed, right? But you're different. You are a Christ follower. You pray, if you pray the Lord's Prayer, Lord, your will be done on heaven as it is on earth as it is in heaven, right? That's say, I want to bring your kingdom here. I want to be a kingdom doer here. So let's get back into this relationship thing. Being committed, fully committed, being both feet in, not being a waiter, being fully committed all the way in, both feet in with Christ is the only way to really be a true Christ follower. And I want you to know, commitment is one of the hardest things that we find in this world today. Relationships across the board are failing because of a lack of commitment. Marriages break up because of a lack of commitment. People who are working sometimes don't keep working because of a lack of commitment. Families break up because of a lack of commitment. You see, if you start at the starting place of your commitment to Christ and you live out this fully, both feet in, fully devoted follower of Christ type of relationship, you'll find that you can be more committed in every other relationship that you have. Commitment, that's the key all the way through. And where do we learn this level of commitment first? In our relationship with Christ. And then it flows out from there. Leave you with one last story. It's a great Scottish missionary. I'm telling you a couple of missionary stories. My heritage is coming out here a little bit. I used to go to a church that, this week in particular, they would have a missionary conference every year. And I would go to these conferences every year, and I would hear these great stories. I remember the story of David Livingstone, who was a great Scottish missionary to Africa in the 19th century. Now, the 19th century, that's the 1800s. That's when slavery was a big deal here, okay? It was one of those things where it was hard to be on neutral ground. You either were for slavery or you were against it. Dr. Livingstone was so anti-slavery that he literally went to Africa to try to stop slavery at its source. And a reporter went to Africa. Some of you have heard the phrase Dr. Livingstone, I presume. Have you heard that? You have no idea where it comes from. Here's where it comes from. Dr. Livingstone was this great Scottish missionary and the only white guy there. And the reporter who shows up to interview him is the only other white guy there. So when he says Dr. Livingstone, I presume, it's because there was nobody else white that he was talking to. That's where it comes from. Now, here's where this idea of commitment comes in. This is what I want to leave you with. Missionary Society back here at home, who was supporting him, wrote to him asking if there were any good roads yet in Africa so that they might send some men to help. Now, I don't know how you would respond to that, but I know for myself, whenever somebody says, hey, can I help you? I'm like, yeah. Let's get the first ticket over here. Do you know what Dr. Livingstone's response was? If you have men who will only come if there are good roads, don't send them at all. Rather, send me the men who will come if there are no roads. Those are the ones that are fully committed. How about you?